are so happy that you have joined us today. I'm going to introduce myself briefly and our initiative, and then introduce our panelists for the conversation we'll be having today. I work for an organization called the Center for Public Justice. This organization is a faith-based civic education and public policy organization. And while we are located in Washington, D.C., we really work in both a national and a place-based capacity to empower both individuals and institutions to really live out what they believe are their sacred responsibilities in the public square, with an emphasis on empowering individuals and institutions to live out their civic stewardship responsibilities. And that is really how the initiative I direct, Sacred Sector, came into being. This initiative launched in 2017. It's generally funded through the Templeton Religion Trust, and it exists to empower faith-based organizations, specifically nonprofits and congregations who may not have the voice or ear of elite members of society, to fully live out their missions in everything they do, and to be a voice for change in their communities. We think in this moment, COVID-19 presents particular challenges and opportunities for these organizations and their leaders to speak distinctively into the public square and help innovate for change, not just change in their own institutional norms, but change in the norms and structures of the institutions we share, like government, culture, to really address some of the disparities we're seeing on a national level with respect to who is being most impacted by COVID-19. We know COVID-19 is most strongly, disparately impacting under-resourced communities, especially individuals in the African American and Hispanic communities, also individuals in communities where there is a lack of healthcare or other important social architecture resources. I am very grateful that today all of our panelists are really engaged with Sacred Sector, both as participants and as people who shape how we speak about this, who shape our curriculum and agenda moving forward. We really think that all three of these panelists reflect a really interesting distinctive with respect to what we call a public justice framework. We are the Center for Public Justice, and we really believe that public justice helps diverse individuals and institutions live out their right roles and responsibilities. So without further ado, I'm going to give a brief explanation of what we're going to be discussing today, and then also introduce our panelists. Today, this webinar will focus on the following themes. Today, we'll be talking about how specifically African American and Hispanic and also Muslim community-based organizations are navigating COVID-19 and some of the distinct challenges and opportunities this moment presents for the navigation of this process. I'm going to start by introducing our panelists today and then asking them a series of questions to give us some insight. We are joined today by Ismail Royer. Ismail is the Director of Islam and Religious Freedom Action Team at the Religious Freedom Institute. Ismail serves as the Director of Islam and Religious Freedom for this institution, and he's converted to Islam in 1992. He studied religious sciences with traditional Islamic scholars, and he spent over a decade working at nonprofit Islamic organizations. In 2003, Ismail was indicted for assisting the Pakistani-based organization and pled guilty to weapons charges related to the violation of United States neutrality laws. Since his release, he has worked with nonprofits to promote peace between faiths and to undermine religious extremism. His writing has appeared in publications like the Washington Post, Public Discourse, Detroit Free Press, and Muslim Matters. We are also joined today by Pastor Harold Duggar. He is the pastor of First Baptist Church of Capitol Heights. Reverend Duggar is a graduate of both the Washington Baptist Seminary and the Faith Christian University and Schools, where he received a bachelor's degree in theology and biblical studies. And lastly, we are joined today by Dr. Denis Struthers. She is the National Director of Operations for Healing Communities. she received her doctorate of ministry at Howard University, and she, with a focus on human trafficking and the role of faith in addressing human trafficking. And with her role with healing communities, she helps empower congregations to be stations of hope to help returning citizens thrive. I'm going to start today with a question to one of our panelists, and they will all have an opportunity to respond. I'm going to start today with addressing Dr. Struthers. Dr. Struthers, I wonder if you can speak into this moment and speak about the faith-based organizations of which you are a part and how COVID-19 has presented distinct challenges and opportunities for the organizations of which you're a part to live out their missions in the public square in this moment.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much, CPJ and Chelsea, for this opportunity. I am with Healing Communities. I'm the National Director of Operations, and we work with training churches to develop ministry, prison ministry in their churches by dealing specifically with those in their congregation. I'm also, I just graduated from Howard University School of Divinity with my doctorate. So, really excited about that. And in 2018, I served as a Sacred Sector Fellow with CPJ. It was for 10 weeks. And as a seminarian, I was equipped with skills and experience to be an emerging leader in the faith-based nonprofit sector. The fellowship really focused on preparing seminarians with the skills they need to navigate leading faith communities and organizations to consistently embody their spiritual values. This experience was absolutely wonderful. It deepened my doctoral research on human trafficking. I strongly believe that churches and their community members must do more than serve those in need. And most churches are excellent in serving those that are in need, and that's great. But churches should recognize how their faith calls them to also engage in acts of citizenship, advocating for public policy changes and cultural shifts that would end human trafficking. And so with Healing Communities, like I said, we train congregations to be stations of hope for families who have incarcerated loved ones. So for churches who are interested in having a ministry to prisoners, we train them how to start with the members in their own congregation and get their church involved in rallying around these families from the moment their loved ones are incarcerated until they return home and have become thriving members in society. And so this main ministry is allowing the family to grieve the loss without guilt or shame. Many congregants will sit there and never tell anyone that their loved ones are incarcerated. So instead, what most families go through, especially the children, is disenfranchised grief. And so in reality, if someone were to be taken from us, we have the opportunity to grieve. We have people to come bring food. There's visits from family, friends, the pastor, and we end with a funeral or a memorial service. But when someone's family member is incarcerated, they're basically experiencing that loss as a death, but there's no food, there's no one really visiting, and the member is feeling the loss just the same. And those of us on the outside are silent most times because we are unsure of what to say. And so these trainings are all about teaching churches how to develop a process and system for how to care for their incarcerated loved ones, from facilitating family visits to mediating family relationships to facilitating a healthy return home and offering social and spiritual and financial support along the way. And the good thing is that because of my research with my doctorate, Healing Communities is also adding the sex trafficking track. And we are really trying to make families and churches aware. In a workshop with pastors, they wanted to know, what can we do? How do we get involved? And so we are providing that information as well. So we're on the front line trying to get prisoners with nonviolent records released so that they do not get exposed to COVID-19. In the DC jail alone, 38 employees were infected, 13 recovered, thank God. 148 inmates were infected, and 72 of those have recovered, and 52 remain in isolation. So although the jails are working to do what they can to ensure that prisoners are released, still it's very difficult. In many cities across our country, judges have released nonviolent criminals to just, go back into society. And then we are working to help them get placed as well into homes, because a lot of times when they come out, they don't have anywhere to go. So we are also encouraging parents to monitor their children's online presence because traffickers and perpetrators are using social media heavily to recruit their victims. They're very skilled in that. And so Matthew 25 encourages us to clothe those in need of clothing, look after those who are sick, visit those in prison. And God is a God of justice. And Proverbs 31:8-9 says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those that are being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. And so God wants justice for the orphans, for the widows, for women and children being sexually exploited, the spouse and children being battered. We cannot be silent anymore. And in times past, the church as a whole, we have been silent. But now we must come outside of the four walls of our church and bring our Christian values to the public square, work with community organizations, work with other religions, because these are issues that threaten all of our communities and all of our families.
Thank you so much, Denise. That was powerful. I'm going to move on to Ismail. And Ismail, we would love to hear a little bit about the context of the organizations that you work with that are providing social services and civic services on the ground in Muslim communities. I wonder what the specific opportunities for redemptive moments and also the challenges that COVID-19 presents for those organizations that are in your network that you're working with to empower them to be able to live out their missions in the public square at this time.
Yeah, sure. So I'm, as you mentioned, I'm the director of Islam and Religious Freedom at the Religious Freedom Institute. We're a non-denominational organization, and our mission is to support religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. What we do when it comes to, or what we are doing when it comes to social services is that we're working on a project with you, in fact, with to try to develop a program that would educate Islamic organizations, Islamic faith-based organizations and congregations on how they can, and would train them on how they can better, and that mission is, when it comes to helping others, it's driven by our sacred texts. So the Quran says, cooperate with one another in righteousness, or piety and righteousness. And the Prophet Muhammad said, none of you will have faith until he loves for his neighbor what he loves for himself, which many of you will recognize that as being a common teaching with Christianity and Judaism. And also that the Prophet said, whoever would love to be shaded in the shade of God, let him help someone in hardship or wave alone. So driven by these, by these imperatives, the desire to help our fellow human beings, Muslim organizations have established actually across the country a very, very deep network of faith-based efforts to help the community. Many of these are focused to some degree on the congregation itself, but I know from very experience that Muslim congregations are very proud they're very pleased to be able to serve the broader community. So most of these initiatives began and remain on the level of a mosque will open up almost from the very beginning. When mosques begin, they open up social service departments where they'll help people in need with food banks, finding how furniture, just assistance in taking people to the doctor, visiting the elderly and the sick, and so on, and even loans grants in need. So these sort of ad hoc efforts don't give the kind of attention that they deserve, or that would help them to really flourish. They often don't receive this kind of attention. There isn't much of a international organization like your own, which focuses on, or for example, with the Jewish community, where they have the several very strong and long-standing support organizations that serve local congregations. We don't have that as much in the Muslim community, and so many of these organizations do not suffer from a lack of, let's say, like knowing best practices in terms of governance, board governance, or also how to lobby or interact with local governments. Or many of these organizations and efforts are simply sort of learning by trial and error, playing it by ear. Since, of course, many of these are immigrant-led, so many of them, people involved in these efforts, suffer from a lack of knowing the system, which can be very difficult, the bureaucracy. Now, also, likewise, we have another aspect of that is that many of these efforts are based in the African American community. Many of the strongest and oldest efforts, whether based at mosques initially or independent of those, are come out of the African American Muslim community, and so they suffer from many of the same problems that Black churches suffer from, which is, that these are underserved communities, are often overlooked when it comes to the support that they need to. And so what we're trying to do is we have a plan for a long-term effort with CPJ, Center for Public Justice and Sacred Sector, to create a series of leadership and training seminars for members of these social service organizations across the country, to try to give them the training that they need and connect them with funders, give them training in how to seek government funding, and also and funding from private foundations, and some tips on board governance, good governance, and other important legal issues, as well as providing expertise from Islamic scholars how to navigate some of the ethically navigate many of these issues. So, for example, there's a ban. It's forbidden for Muslims to take interest or to pay interest, and so with this latest COVID, with the COVID, you have the Paycheck Protection Program, which is structured as what is essentially a loan, and it's an interest-bearing loan, and so. But at the same time, it's also a forgivable loan if the money is used in the proper way. So there's some confusion and some lack of clarity on, and this is a rather technical question, as whether this actually amounts to interest, the sort of interest that is forbidden for Muslims to engage in. So there's a difficulty there. Now, I am part of a congregation here in Pennsylvania where I just recently moved. And I asked them if our imam, if they were aware of the Paycheck Protection Program was available to houses of worship, including mosques. And he told me that they were aware of it and they had looked into it, and it determined, I guess, that the interest issue was that their bank was not participating in this, and they didn't know how to apply for this when their own personal bank that they were using was not participating in that program. A huge bank, and he said that they were extremely unhelpful in giving them any guidance, and there's that issue. Other issues, for example, and it's regretful to say, but there are issues related to prejudice and surrounding some of the activities that Muslims have engaged in to try to help. So, for example, there is a mosque in Syracuse, New York, that tried to that was open. It had closed, but it was open only for food packets to distribute to the community, and it was open under very strict conditions, only 10 at a time, and they could only be the volunteers who were there anyway, working on putting the food packets together. And the fact that this mosque was quote unquote open, even though it wasn't really open, became spread around the internet on some very intolerant forums and internet accounts, social media accounts that were attempting to use this as the fact of this mosque having been open in that very limited fashion, to try to say, oh, look, Christians, churches are being harassed for being open, but mosques are all open. And so anyway, That's
a great point, Ismail. And I'm going to let you, there's a couple of other examples I'd love for you to get to if we have time for Q&A at the end. Thank you so much. And I think Ismail's point is a great transition to our final panelist, Reverend Duggar. As Ismail mentioned, faith-based nonprofits, like all nonprofits and community-based nonprofits especially, face real challenges with respect to the ideas that they often are overcoming a lack of funding and resources, but they're often also navigating potential religious biases, especially minority religious nonprofits who are operating in sometimes hostile circumstances, as Ismail described. And it's also important to note that within African American and Hispanic communities, they are often supported by their religious organizations, whether those religious organizations are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or another faith. And some of those institutions themselves are facing real challenges because the volume of support their members need as they navigate the economic, spiritual, and financial fallout of COVID-19 is so great. So with that, I want to transition to Pastor Duggar, who will help us take up this question. Pastor Duggar leads a local congregation in DC with Capitol Heights, and his congregation has several social outreach programs, including a food distribution program, and it works very closely with the local government in Capitol Heights and other community-based and faith-based organizations, including a local Muslim organization. So I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Duggar for him to be able to speak a little bit on the kind of unique challenges and opportunities that COVID-19 is presenting for his congregation and the ministries and outreach supports they are involved in. Thank you, Pastor Duggar. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Great. Yep.
Yes. First of all, let me say thank you to Chelsea and to CPJ and also to Upswell. Certainly, I am grateful to God for this opportunity. Can you guys still hear me okay? Can you see me okay, Chelsea?
Yes. I just muted myself so no one would hear my baby crying in the background.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much. Let me just say that, first of all, I'm grateful for this opportunity and for this platform. I get to hear a lot of what's going on in the community at large, in which we are trying to replicate. One of the things that I've tried to do as a pastor, first of all, this is my first time pastorate. I came to First Baptist Church in 2000, and we're 2 blocks into the interior of Capitol Heights. We're 2 blocks actually from the DC Maryland line, which really poses some great challenges for us. Though we are in the suburbs, we have some unique challenges because it is primarily an African American congregation and community. And one of the things that I've tried to do since I've been there, the Bible says that God took the blood of one man and made all men. And I tried to look around me and see who's in our communities. And we try to assess the needs. And regardless of color of skin, regardless of people's religious perspectives or whatever their perspectives are, period. One of the things I've tried to communicate to our congregation is that the culture is evolving. And the church, this has been my personal experience as an African-American pastor, that in my context, that the culture is evolving, but the church has not been evolving like it should. And so for a long time, we've missed out on a lot of things. Yes, while we have been faced with a lot of challenges, one of the things that I've come to understand is that the Bible says, my people perish because of a lack of knowledge. And one of the things that for me, my experience has been, we've reduced the assignment. A lot of people don't understand the mission that God has given us as a church, more or less as a people. So one of the things I've tried to do as a pastor is I've tried to expose us to and educate us to what the mission, what our faith is all about. And it goes way beyond the church doors. One of the things that COVID has done for us by default is to help us to understand that we are the church. The building is not the church. The building is simply a central meeting place for believers and whoever wants to come in. But now that the church doors have kind of been shut and we can't get in, that does not preclude the mission and the assignment that God has given us. So as a result, I've looked at around us and some of the challenges, the mission that still has to go on. I've looked at some of the challenges and how can we continue to carry out those challenges, the mission that God has given us. Some of the challenges just in particular, such as a food desert. We have a food desert in Capitol Heights. We do not have a grocery store nowhere in Capitol Heights. And so our church feed literally was feeding 4,000 to 6,000 people a month. Now, mind you, my congregation is only about 130, 50 people at the most. And so I've tried to help us to understand is that it's not so much the size, is where the resources are. And how can we do this? It can be done. And so how do we find out where those resources are? What are the needs? And one of the roles that Sacred Sect and CPJ has played for us is that we've always had a protocol for engaging in a lot of the political activities and legislation that comes out. And so when I met Chelsea and Sacred Sector, they helped me to expand and to reinforce that platform, especially as it relates to the legislation that comes out, and it helps us to understand what our boundaries are and what our liberties are. And it also helped us to understand that what we are entitled to. One of the things that as a pastor I learned early is in the church that I serve in particular is that they thought that we should not be engaged in relationship with government. But there are so many resources that have been put on the table. Just a case in point, pre-COVID, we are doing a $23 million project, affordable housing project. Being right beside DC, that's one of our greatest challenges. We have challenges with quality schools. In particular, Prince George's County has been said to be the most influential African Americans in the nation living in Prince George's County. But yet we are second behind Baltimore in terms of the worst schools. And so one of the things I've tried to help our community understand is these things that don't happen by osmosis, and especially in the church. We just can't sit around and think God's gonna make a way somehow. So we ask ourselves, how does God make a way? And so we have to begin to explore those opportunities. And so when I met Chelsea, that also helped me to look further at some of the opportunities that was out there. One in particular that President Trump put out was the Opportunity Zone. We didn't have $23 million, but God blessed us to be able to move forward in this project. And the only reason why the building is not up is because we are in the mid of COVID right now. We have healthcare challenges in our community. Mental health. A lot of people in our community don't have health care and proper health care. Employment and via COVID, there's a lot of unemployment that's going on. And so that causes people to have greater needs. And so because people have needs, does not mean that the mission ceases. So that means it just intensifies and it accelerates the process and what we need to do to better be able to service the persons in our communities. We're having people that are dying, not just because of COVID, but because of life in itself. And as a result, some of the challenges we're having is people are not being able to have funerals. People are having graveside services. And as a pastor, my primary responsibility is, first of all, to be able to preach and teach and to comfort the people of God. But then beyond that, we have the responsibility of ensuring that we are meeting needs in the community. Matthew 25 says, as Dr. Struthers said, Jesus said, when I was hungry, you fed me. He says, when I was sick, you came to see about me. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. He says, and when I was naked, you clothed me. And so disciples asked him, well, when did we see you like this? And we did these things. He said, when you've done it unto the least of my brethren, you've done it unto me. Having said that, beside my church is a Muslim mosque. I had a great relationship with them before they moved. We had in 2010 the opportunity of doing $100,000 worth of proceeds for our communities. Many people ask me, well, Pastor Duggar, why are you partnering with the Muslim community? Should you guys be at odds with one another? I said, no. I said, we're not proselytizing. We're here together. We're looking at the community needs. And because we see that common need, we've joined forces together and we work to meet those needs. I work with the county council. I work in Annapolis with the governor. I work with organizations such as IAF, Industrial Area Foundation, which is an international and national organization. PLAN, which is an acronym for Prince George's Leadership Action Network, which is a community roots organization, where we work as a third party to assist in whatever capacity we can as it relates to all of these issues. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much, Chelsea.
Yeah, we actually had a question from one of our panelists, and they're wondering, and this is open to Pastor Duggar, Dr. Struthers, or Ismail, wondering how some of the faith-based organizations you're connected to, and Pastor Duggar, you began to talk about this, potentially work across the aisle with respect to working with other faith-based organizations to advance their missions or to serve their communities. I wonder, Pastor Duggar, if you could just talk a little bit more about how you work with the local mosque in terms of serving Capitol Heights.
Well, one of the things that Chelsea, I realize is that we're human beings. And regardless whether you subscribe to my perspective or not, that's okay. You're entitled what you believe. But when there are people that are hungry, they don't care what we believe. They're hungry. When people are homeless, they don't care what you believe. They want to know that you care. And so crossing the aisles and going to talk to them, we first established that as a relationship. And I let them use the part of my lawn to have Ramadan. Because again, we're in the community together and we believe in sharing resources. And so out of that came a great relationship. And so that was as important to me.
Wonderful. And I wonder if Denis, you or Ismail have anything to add about how you've worked with organizations across the religious or ideological aisle, perhaps with public partnerships or with other secular community-based organizations that support the work you're doing in terms of human trafficking or returning citizens work?
Yeah, with Healing Communities, we have a training manual that is specific for the church. The Christian church, we have them that's specific for the Catholic Church, for other religions like Buddhism, those who are Muslims. I mean, we cater to whatever organization wants training, because having someone incarcerated or someone who is being trafficked, it affects every community in every state in the United States and all around the world. So to just only provide it for Christians is not that helpful. It has to affect everyone. So we provide training for whoever has someone that's incarcerated or someone who is being trafficked.
Wonderful. And I wonder, just using this example of returning citizens, if Ismail, you'd be willing to speak just briefly to kind of the distinct and unique position that some returning citizens who have converted to Islam while they are in a period of incarceration may face when they're coming out of incarceration with respect to the social and spiritual supports they may have or lack with their new faith communities.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, many people in prison who convert to Islam and are very sincere in their desire to want to, to do positive things with their life and to, and so, but when they come out, they often lack support from the community. There are across the country several good organizations. For example, the Inner City Muslim Action Network in Chicago and Atlanta, and then you have an organization called Link Outside in California, and others that are doing a lot on this. But just as a matter of fact, you have a Rashidun Center over in Southwest. So you have them, but they just don't have the they need. They suffer from two things. One, I think, is that there is, frankly, I'm just going to be very honest, there's a lack of and I don't want to necessarily air dirty laundry, but there's I think a lack of being in touch from the immigrant community or immigrant in the second, third generations with African American mosques, and since most and African American communities, so many of these people are coming from the African American community are not. They don't have the same resources that many of the immigrant communities do. This isn't out of animosity, but it's just due to a lack of, I think, communication and being in connection. So
1 minute, Ismail.
Okay.
So I'm sorry to
sure,
but,
sure.
I think you're trying to say too, as we've talked about, a lot of the African American individuals who may convert to Islam in incarceration, they come out, they may not have a faith community they're already connected with that reflects those beliefs, and it's harder. There may be barriers for forming those connections.
Yes.
And I think this is a really interesting conversation, one that Sacred Sector will definitely be picking up, potentially through Upswell and potentially through our own networks going forward. So stay tuned if you're interested. I do want to make sure that we have an opportunity to share how you can stay connected to these panelists and to Sacred Sector overall, and our independent sector friends are doing a screen share to bring up a slide that will touch on that right now. So again, we are happy to connect you directly to all of our resources. You can visit Sacred Sector's website at sacredsector.org. And if independent sector may be having technical issues sharing their screen, and sharing the last slides around how to stay connected. There we go, how to get involved. We have all of our emails right here up on the screen for you. and we have how you can connect to us. If you are interested in any of the specific resources that have been mentioned on today's webinar, if you want to email me directly, I can connect you to the right panelist to receive those resources. And if you're interested in being a part of our Sacred Sector learning community going forward, these are the types of conversations we're having about how to engage with each other, sometimes even across faiths and across mission areas, to kind of fully live out our common vision for human flourishing in the public square. We want to thank Upswell and Independent Sector's wonderful team for helping bring this team together today. And I really want to thank Denis and Ismail and Pastor Duggar for joining us today. We're already a minute over, so I will turn it back over to the Independent Sector staff and just say thank you for taking the time to be participating in what we hope is the beginning of a conversation about the role of faith-based nonprofits in the public square.